Steve Phillip, a widely recognized figure in the field of leadership. His previous books include Lincoln on Leadership and the Founding Fathers on Leadership. He speaks frequently around the country to various corporations and so forth. And what he does is he finds quotes that are from the subject he's studying, and then he analyzes them and within the context of their life. Martin Luther King Jr. on August 11, 1956 wrote or said, "Let nobody fool you. All the loud noises we hear today are nothing but the death groans of the dying system. The old order is passing away, the new order is coming into being. But whenever there is anything new, there are new responsibilities. As we think of this coming new world, we must think of the challenges that we confront and the new responsibilities that stand before us. We must prepare to live in a new world." And this chapter is called Preparing to Lead. The first lesson is first listen, lead by being led. I neither started the protest nor suggested it. I simply responded to the call of the people for a spokesperson, said Martin Luther King Jr. in 1958. Montgomery is known as the cradle of the Confederacy. It has been a quiet cradle for a long, long time, but now the cradle is rocking. Martin Luther King Jr., March 31st, 1956. As he reached the top of the steps, 25-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. must have paused to take a look around before entering the small two-story red brick building for the first time. Looking to the east, he couldn't have missed the Confederate flag waving in the wind atop the old state capitol building, still there after having been unfurled for the first time nearly a century earlier. He probably would have noticed, too, that the American flag was positioned below the Confederate flag, which, can I just say, I don't know, and I've said this before, but I don't know any country that waves the flags of its previous rebellions and previous other countries in its state houses, or names its bases, like Fort Lee, like its military bases after opposing general. It's different than like the Virginia state flag or something like that, or even like the Don't Tread on Me flag, which says a thing. But to wave a Confederate battle flag, if we're at war with someone, right? Nobody's waving like a Taliban flag or renaming the names of their forts after Taliban leaders, right? We don't have Fort Osama bin Laden. Also from his position, he could have readily viewed the portico where, on February 18th, 1861, Jefferson Davis had been sworn in as the President of the Confederate States of America. As it was, Martin found himself standing smack dab in the middle of downtown Montgomery, Alabama, the cradle of the Confederacy, the first national capital of the Confederate States. The building he was about to enter was Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the parish for which he had just accepted the job of pastor. It was to be his first professional position after... Look at this. What are you doing? I'm holding this bird and she's holding the toilet paper. What is happening? You're cute. It's very rude to hold a bird like this. You're never supposed to hold them like this, but she just doesn't seem to care. You're supposed to let them sit on your feet, not hold them like some kind of weird rat or something like that. And she trusts me. She trusts that I'm not going to drop her, which is insane. Why do you trust me? Why do you trust me? What if I just drop you into toilet paper, huh? It was to be his first professional position after leaving Boston University, one he had taken despite the initial reluctance of both his father and his bride, Coretta Scott. Martin's new church, with its all-black congregation, was created during Reconstruction after the Civil War, purposely erected in the shadow of the all-white Capitol building as a symbol of the newly mandated freedom of former slaves. But in 1954, Montgomery was a bastion of racial segregation. It had been that way for generations, part of an ingrained Southern culture that perpetuated never-ending downward spiral of oppression and despair for African Americans. People were used to it. That's just the way it was. Black citizens and white citizens, for example, were not allowed to sit together on a public bus. If a white person took a seat next to an African American, the African American was required to stand in the aisle. Even though 75% of the bus company's clientele were African Americans, they were always directed at the back of the bus. And by city ordinance, violators were subject to fines and imprisonment. Bus drivers, all of whom were white, were given authority to enforce these rules. Such power, though, often resulted in heated arguments that resulted in the drivers calling passengers a variety of racial epithets, including black cow, ape, and the N-word. In one ugly episode, a 15-year-old named Claudette Colvin, who also happened to be unmarried and pregnant, was dragged from a bus for refusing to give up her seat to a white person. For her resistance, the young woman was charged with assault and battery along with violating city and state segregation ordinances. This incident occurred shortly after Martin King settled into his new home. Interestingly enough, immediately upon his arrival, Martin placed the existing racial situation in context that had not previously been articulated to local residents. "It is a significant fact that I come to Dexter at a most crucial hour of our world's history," he said in his first sermon, "at a time when the flame of war might arise at any time to redden the skies of our dark and dreary world, at a time when men are experiencing in all realms of life disruption and conflict, self-destruction and meaningless despair and anxiety." Right, this is the 50s and 60s, and so we're dealing with, we're dealing with the Cold War starting at this point in time. Not quite yet, but that's kind of where we are. For him, the human environment in Montgomery was part of a national crisis not to be tolerated, and Martin let it be known that he intended to do something about it, that he also expected his parishioners to do something about it. Dexter, he went on to say in that same sermon, must somehow lead men and women to the high mountain of peace and salvation. We must give men and women who are all but on the brink of despair a new bent of life. I pray God that I will be able to lead Dexter in this urgent mission. Montgomery's newest preacher hit the ground running. He joined the NAACP's local chapter and was quickly elected to its executive committee. He was interested in social problems. And then it talks about Rosa Parks. Oh, I didn't know this. This is long, but I didn't know this. After Rosa Parks did her thing, E.D. Nixon, a lawyer and former president of the local NAACP chapter, rushed downtown and secured her release on bond. After hearing the details of the incident, Nixon told Mrs. Parks that if she was willing to be the lightning rod, they would try to take her case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, while also instituting a boycott of the bus company, which makes sense if 75% of the bus company's clientele are black. That's a lot of money they're gonna lose. With some hesitation, she gave the okay to let her attorney move forward with his ideas. That was all Nixon needed to hear. The next morning, he telephoned every black leader in town to let them know what had happened, to inform them that there was already a spontaneously generated boycott of city buses taking place, and to call an emergency meeting for the evening. He was also asking everybody to support the boycott. What's interesting, and I'll say this and you can take it as you like, it's interesting to note that the segregation mandates were government mandates. The government required, you could go to jail, right? So that was government. And the move that ended segregation was a private sector mandate. It was using the economy. It was boycotting the buses and then going through the legislative system, right? Because you can also look at other rulings. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says if the people don't act on it, right? The Supreme Court also ruled that the Trail of Tears was unconstitutional, and Andrew Jackson said, who's going to enforce it? What army? And he still kicked out all of the native peoples from their own land, right? The difference is the money. The bus can't enforce segregation rules. The power of the private sector and the power of the individual, I think, matters a lot. And I don't think that is the conclusion this guy is going to draw. I've read some of his other stuff. That's why I said, his intro bored me. Big government using corporations, like the bus company. It's these big organizations together doing bad things, and then it's the individuals, Rosa Parks, Nixon, the people who chose not to ride the bus, right? The power is in the individual. The power is in you. Big corporations and big action committees and big governments try to make us think that the power is not in us. It's kind of the same as with the guerrilla warfare stuff that we talked about. You have a psychological edge with the power of the individual and the power of story. When Nixon reached Martin King, he detected some reluctance in the young minister's voice, even though Martin had agreed to host the gathering in Dexter's basement meeting room. Nixon then called Ralph Abernathy, who had become fast friends with King, and asked him to help persuade the young pastor to become fully committed to the boycott. That evening, somewhere between 50 and 70 leaders of Montgomery's African-American community met at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Abernathy and Reverend Elroy Bennett, president of Montgomery's Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, ran the meeting. Anyone who wished to speak was allowed to do so. Martin, however, remained silent, listening intently, whispering to those near him, pondering and thinking. Two key decisions were agreed upon by the group. First, the ministers would launch at least a one-day boycott, and second, they would hold a community-wide mass meeting that same evening in order to determine whether the public would support an indefinite extension of the bus boycott. After the meeting broke up, Martin and Ralph stayed at Dexter late into the night, mimeographing flyers. The next day, hundreds of volunteers began spreading more than 7,000 notices all over town. Some of the ministers even went around to nightclubs to spread the word, and at Sunday services, each alerted their congregation to the boycott and the upcoming mass meeting. So it's the power of church organization. What's interesting is when you compare this to the March 5th movement in Korea, which was also organized through churches, as they were, it's like for independence from Japan. Korea is interesting because during that time, there were basically three factions in the independence movements. Young liberal college students, it was churches, and then there was a Buddhist movement. And within the independence movement, there were two kind of major splits. One being the more communist split that eventually ended up becoming North Korea, and the other independence movement that ended up being more of a slightly more free market or republic focus, which ended up being the dictatorship of South Korea that then evolved into the Republic of South Korea. So it's interesting, but it's interesting to see how community mobilization, in that case, as in the case of the mobilization in Montgomery, is powerful for social change. What are you doing? What are you doing? That is a power that is often overlooked because we focus so much on things like corporations and governments. I mean, in the US anyway, the Republican and Democrat parties are who is going to save us, the government or the big corporations. Those are both fallacies because the reality is that full social change happens with the people. That's why Che Guevara failed. That's why Martin Luther King succeeded. The mobilization in the private sector, starting with what you really believe, which is why this happened in churches, right? It has to be something that you really believe and that gets to the core of you. That's where change begins. So this guy's first point is set goals and create a plan of action. So they set up 3 goals or demands that were set to be the basis of negotiation. First, no one would have to stand when there was a vacant seat, nor would anyone be compelled to give up a seat already occupied. Second, bus drivers would have to be courteous to all patrons. And third, black people could apply and be hired as bus drivers. This setting goals thing is a really big deal, and it is why there have been problems with some more contemporary movements trying to achieve similar goals. Because if you don't make a specific set of demands that are very specific, like so-and-so can apply to be hired, right? If it's vague and can't be proven and can't be checked, and it's not a SMART goal, right? Remember, SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, they are results driven, and they are time bound, right? You can measure that. You can measure, was a person allowed to apply and be hired? You can measure whether or not someone has to stand or sit, right? Those are specific things. And unfortunately, a lot of, especially social media activists nowadays, it's really easy to get into arguments with people, and I am a little arrogant about it, but I'm super frustrated when people just want to say that somebody's bad, and don't want to actually get stuff done, right? We've talked before about how, in the context of police violence, there was some British person or somebody who's not even from the US who was commenting on how terrible the US is because of race relations, and I said, specifically solve things, we need to get specific. I think Join Campaign Zero has some really good and specific rules for things that could be different, like ending broken windows policing, which is something you can actually measure. You can actually change legislation to require that everyone wears cameras, right? Specific and useful things, not just, I hate all of this kind of people. That is useless, ineffective, and does nothing. Then this was a huge account, and she sent a bunch of people to yell at me, and she's white. And I was like, woman, you aren't helping. You haven't done anything to help. You're not even in this country. Fuck off. But I didn't say that. What I did was I asked her a bunch of questions that hurt her feelings, because I asked her what she'd done, what money she'd given, what practically she'd suffered in the name of the cause for civil rights, and a bunch of other stuff, and she was really sad because the answer was nothing to all of them. She just liked to be angry, and she hadn't even checked the Campaign Zero stuff or anything. So it is absolutely useless if all you do is go angry and say angry things. It doesn't do anything. You need to have specific demands. It's fine to be angry. In fact, it's good to be angry. You need to be angry. There is a very good BTS song in Korean, Ugh, which is really uk, in Korean, is about anger and about wasted anger. And that song probably is talking about the Korean K-pop stars who committed suicide after a lot of bullying about their personal lives and stuff like that. But it is singing about wasted anger. It is singing about people just being angry and yelling stuff, and that the goodness of anger is being wasted. And there's a line in there where he says, I think RM says, I'm angry about the lost anger. He's angry that, like, there's so much need for social change, and anger is just being splayed all around like a shotgun. It's not hitting anything, it's not doing anything. And this is a big part of that. Being angry about something, you need to be specific, rational, intelligent. You need to get stuff done. You need to sit down and say, this is what I want. This is the specific thing that I want to have done. I specifically want all of the police officers in this state to be wearing body cameras. Being specific with your demands and having specific goals and specific plans of action is going to make a much bigger difference, and it's much more difficult than just, I'm going to say an angry thing online. I definitely don't mean to be promoting anti-British stereotypes with that lady, but something that unpleasant British people and unpleasant Americans have in common is imperialism. It's the saying, oh, my brilliant country is going to fix your brilliant country with my white man's burden, right? By telling you what to do, but not learning your problems or helping you with them in any way. British people have a long history of that. Americans have a history of that. A lot of world powers have a history of that. And that's what I'll say about that. Doesn't mean that all Americans are like that. Doesn't mean all British people are like that. I gotta say, some British people are cool as fuck. And some Americans are pretty cool too. Right. Did you find this string? This is a cool string, huh? Yeah? You like that string? Oh, you threw it down. It's gone. You're gonna pick it back up? Good job. Unfortunately, it's something a lot of it's difficult when you want to change the world to find the line, and this is why we have these conversations about leadership, these conversations about efficiency and efficacy, right? Efficacy more than efficiency, because people who want to change the world, wanting to change the world isn't enough. Hitler wanted to change the world, right? How you do it, and specifically what you intend to do, matter a lot. And we learn these superhero things so that we can learn to be more useful, right? Because people who wanted to change the world through manifest destiny and their white man's burden and all that stuff, they wanted to change the world. They thought they were doing a good thing. But the question is the failure to listen first, which is part of what this chapter is about learning, about Martin Luther King learning and being educated by people in his community. Listening first matters. And by the way, human beings are complicated. We've talked over and over again how a lot of modern medical science owes itself to evil things that the Nazis did that we've since learned from. Doesn't make it okay, and that's not how we should, that's not how stuff should have been learned. It was evil. But Wegener's polyandritis, which is now called something else, because people don't want to use his name, was discovered because of evil experiments and evil Nazi scientists did on Jewish people, right? Not cool. Really fucked up, right? So evil people even can leave good impact. So I don't know if you guys remember, but I've mentioned before Margaret Sanger in the 1930s. If you've read any of her books, which are very difficult to find now because it pays to have them hidden, but if you've read any of her books, you can read portions where she talks about how she wanted to eliminate the black population, and she wanted to do so by convincing black ministers to recommend Planned Parenthood and to treat it as a health thing to reduce the black population. That was in the 1930s and 40s. Well, in the 1950s, Martin Luther King did work with Planned Parenthood in his area, right? And today, in the United States, a third of the black population of my generation has been eliminated. The population would have been a third bigger if not for the zealous impact that Planned Parenthood has had targeting black people specifically, and targeting the black population. And I'm not saying, because nobody believes, I don't think, that Planned Parenthood, who knows, but I don't think anyone believes that Planned Parenthood now is intentionally trying to eliminate black people, although there are doctors who want to. I have heard racist doctors say things like that. That is a thing that exists. There are racist doctors. But it's more that you can make money and you can get grant money by targeting black neighborhoods. But it is a fact that that's what's happened, regardless of whether or not that's the goal, right? I'm not going to say that, all of Planned Parenthood or all abortion doctors are racist or anything like that, because I know that's not the case. There are plenty of non-racist abortion providers. And there are plenty of people who believe that abortion is a good thing for the black population, or for any impoverished population, right? Especially for women. There are people who have the best intentions at heart in what they do. But it is still a fact that the results exist, right? The results still exist. That's why Martin Luther King's children are very against the abortion targeting of the black population, because in their generation, and then afterwards in my generation, it has been used as a weapon to make it more difficult, because with less black people, it's more difficult for black people to mobilize and have the vote. In order to have stronger black voting blocks, you need more black people to exist. So whether it was intentional or not, these mistakes that have been done, which we know was intentional on Margaret Sanger's part, we know she wrote it. You can read her books. She went to KKK meetings. That's not Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has since apologized for her statements and behavior. Please don't mishear me, but it is a fact that things that people have done, including things that some civil rights leaders have done, have negatively affected, the overall strength of the black population. Does that mean the fact that Martin Luther King supported Planned Parenthood, does that mean that the rest of his work is or the fact that he cheated on his wife, does that mean that the rest of his work is not valuable anymore? Of course not. And I think that's important to understand. I think it's important to understand that the people in the ring who are trying to make a difference, it's very easy for us to look and say they're good or bad or this or that. But it's more useful than trying to label good or bad. It's more useful to look at the specifics of how they achieved what we want to achieve. Like the power of, the march from Selma, the power of making, the lunch counter sit-outs, power of changing the face of segregation in the United States, to have that kind of influence. Bottom line, what I'm trying to say is good people do bad things, bad people do good things. Again, it is important to be specific, measurable, attainable, rational, and time-bound. Realistic and time-bound. Wee! Are you swinging on this? Do you like this? Is this a fun toy? Because when we're learning from people, we learn from the specific things they did. You know, we learn from specific takeaways and keys. It's really not useful just to be, again, the same with the social media thing. This person is bad, this country is bad, this guy did, this or that. That's not helpful. What's helpful is, how can I achieve what I want to achieve, and how can I take from this person what I need to learn to make it happen?